What is the difference between the police hiring process in the past versus now? The difference between then and now. Let's discuss. Hey, before we get started, I have two gifts in the description for you. One is the Getting Started workshop. It's going to walk you through every phase of the hiring process, plus there's some hidden bonuses in there. Next is a coaching call with myself or any other member of my team. We can jump on, discuss anything specific to your hiring process or your law enforcement career. Now, the difference between getting hired in the past versus now. I guess we can kind of define what the past is. So the past, let's say anything prior to 2010, right? Let's say anything prior to 2010. We're pushing the edges a little bit there, but what has changed since then? Let's start with the big one. How many departments you apply to, right? In the past, it was very common to just go out there and shotgun resumes out there. And in some aspects, that concept can still work. You know, you're giving yourself multiple opportunities to get hired on. But what I've been seeing from dealing with thousands of police applicants and my own personal experiences in the past is that law enforcement departments don't want that anymore. Matter of fact, one of the big questions that you hear executive members ask, such as chiefs or sheriffs or anyone in an authority position over that department or within that department, is why should we choose you? What makes you committed to this department? And the reason they're feeling that way is because in today's day and age, with the shortage of law enforcement we have, and the shortage isn't because we don't have applicants that are willing to apply, the shortage is because we had so many retirements that it turned out to be a cascading effect that we just couldn't keep up with, right? We can only put so many people through the academy. So when they ask you, why should we believe that you're committed to this department with all these open vacancies? Now you have laterals, right? And other states have now opened up out of state laterals. So more states are allowing other law enforcement officers certified in other states. Federally, this doesn't usually matter, but state, local, right? So local would be city, town, county, and state. That's all considered local law enforcement. All of those typically would have to go through a whole nother academy to go to another state. Well, that's not necessarily the case anymore. Now, more states are allowing out of state laterals where you come in, maybe you do a few week bridge course, right? Learn the local state laws, and then you go straight into patrol. You know, maybe you're assigned a training instructor, right, or an FTO, field training officer. But once again, it's a very much abbreviated situation, and we can just lateral those officers directly over. It saves the department so much time, saves them so much money and academy costs. They're getting certified officers already or officers with experience. So laterals look great to these departments. The there's a whole nother problem with that, which is if you just keep latering around, you wind up running into what the construction field is now, where the average applicant in the construction field is in their 50s because they just keep cycling through the same individuals and haven't tried to recruit newer individuals. That that's a topic for another time. But for this specific one, you come in, you apply to dozens of agencies, right? Let's say you apply to 10 agencies. Well, what makes me think if I'm the chief or I'm the sheriff of that department, what makes me think you're committed to my department? When I ask you, hey, why should I hire you? What makes me believe you're going to stay? I'm going to invest all this money, especially as a brand new applicant, someone I have to put through the academy, someone that I have to train, someone that I'm going to invest my department's time and resources and financial capabilities into. What makes me think you're going to stay here, or if I'm not just going to replace you in a year because you lateral to another department and now you can lateral out of state to some places. When you say, oh, you know, I'm committed to this department, this is the department I really want to work for, really, because you applied to 10, right? So then versus now, that doesn't really work. In the past, if you hear, you know, an officer with a lot of experience, a lot of years in, say, "Oh yeah, the way I did was I just shotgun my resume out there and I worked for the first department that hired me." Now I agree with that. You accept the first department that makes you a final offer. Couldn't get those words out there for a second. So you accept the first department. Why? Because you've already analyzed your top three. And that's the tip for this one. Pick your top three. It's so easy to articulate. Hey, I analyzed all the departments around here that I could apply to. And I settled on the top three that I would feel good working for because I support their mission, right? And I support their department. That sounds so good, right? Bam, this is so well. And then what do they have left to say? Well, what if one of these other departments make you an offer? No, I'm committed to the department that makes me an offer. That's why I took the time to analyze these three departments, and any one of these I would be honored to work for. You say that to a chief, you say that to a sheriff, and he or she is gonna, they're gonna feel this individual did their due diligence. Doesn't matter their age. They're a mature individual. They looked into it. They didn't shotgun their resume out there. They did put their resume out there in multiple departments because they want to become a law enforcement officer, right? Do you want to be an ABC police officer or do you want to be a law enforcement officer, right? Ultimately, if I feel I can serve any of these three communities, I can articulate that, right? That's where it is. And you can serve any community you want, but and to make a department not feel like they're a stepping stone, right, to your next higher adventure or endeavor, that's kind of what you're going for. You want to make sure that you analyze which departments are the best fit and three. Because guess what? If one department tells you no, you can always rotate another one of those departments in, right? If you say, hey, I found five departments I'm going to work for, great, pick your top three. And if one tells you no, rotate that another one in there so that you're not sitting here on a 6 month rotation where I applied to one department, they said no. 6 months later, I applied to another department, they said no. 6 months later, I applied to a third department. They said yes. Well, it took me 18 months to become a law enforcement officer. Well, with these top three plus a rotation, if someone tells you no, we're getting candidates hired at a 30% faster rate. The average hiring process is 6 to 8 months, sometimes a year. We're doing it in 4 months with most of our candidates because they're doing this rotation and it's working out really well. So that's something that I would say. The then versus now, shotgunning your resume out there, I wouldn't recommend it. Once again, this is my advice based on what I've seen working with thousands of candidates and my past experience, plus what I see when we were hiring individuals. We're like, hey, how committed are you to this? Because we've hired someone and then we put them through the academy, and within a month getting back, they actually their dream department made them an offer, and it was a long hiring process, and they left. And man, they will not be welcome with that department ever again. And then that department had some animosity, so they would share it with any other department in that local area as well. And this was federal, so keep that in mind. So there's that aspect. Now, moving on. So you have how many departments you apply to. Now it's the standard in which you apply or what you do during your application. What type of candidate we're looking for. So if I'm applying, right, back in the day, then we were looking for the strongest, fastest candidate, right? It was hands down the number one thing we were looking for, the strongest, fastest candidate, right? Because why? You want someone like that working beside you if you ever get into trouble. That's not necessarily the case anymore. What we want now is a candidate that can articulate the facts and our candidate that can evaluate a situation, even if it's just rapidly, even if they only have a few seconds, that can make analytical decisions based on the facts presented to them. What we're really looking for is a candidate that's not going to get the department sued or cost the chief or sheriff their pension because they're right there at retirement. No one wants to risk that because they made a bad hire, right? And so the strongest, fastest candidate, we're still looking for that. Physical fitness is still a critical element, but now more emphasis is put on the interviews, right? So, hey, did the applicant, if you look at a lot of PT tests now, physical training tests or whatever your department's calling them, if you look at a lot of them now, a lot of them are going to a very simplistic, type of obstacle course. Now there are some components to the obstacle course that are difficult for a lot of people. Some of them have a 6 foot wall climb, right, with no aided assist. So if you're short or if you're not, if you lack upper body strength and you don't have the technique, that 6 foot wall climb can be very difficult. There's techniques and tips and tricks to help you with that, but that is a significantly easier easier test than saying, hey, you have to do, 30 push-ups in a minute, 35 sit-ups in a minute. You have to run a mile and a half in under 14 minutes, and you have to do a 300-meter run in under, 59 seconds back to back, right? With 5 minute or 10-minute rests in between there. That's really kind of testing an all around response. Where the obstacle course, I get that. That's they're trying to make it more realistic, right? They're trying to say, hey, maybe you're gonna have to do a fence jump, or maybe you're gonna have to do. I don't think that's necessarily lowering the standards, but I will say that one aspect requires significantly more training, right? To be able to properly perform a physical exertion with limited breaks or limited rest. So, some departments require you to do all those that I just said, push-ups, sit-ups, mile and a half, 300-meter, plus a swim, right? So if you're not a strong swimmer, you might just fail to swim. And if you fail any component of it, you fail. But there's that aspect, right? So no longer is it just, hey, the strongest, fastest guy or gal, right? That's not the case anymore. Now it's, hey, what does this person do when we presented with this scenario, right? When I present you with the scenario, what would you do in this situation, or how would you handle this situation in a board interview, or a chief's interview, or a psychological interview? I'll get to that here in a little bit, but that is a considerable amount of weight that they use to evaluate someone, because if you say something that may be inaccurate or really just wrong, um, what are you going to do in the academy, or what are you going to do on the street? What are you going to do when you're finally out on your own? Are you going to be able to analyze and process? And it's a real thing. I've seen candidates get hired, then get kicked out of the academy because they made the wrong choice. And you say, man, the academy is for training. Yes, but if you make a choice that is significantly wrong, that they find as either a major officer safety issue or a major civil rights or constitutional violation, they're not going to tolerate it, right? Those days are gone. Law enforcement departments don't want to be in the news for a negative light. We're trying to build the bridge back here with our community members. We're trying to get back to that service mentality of, hey, it's not you versus us or us versus you. It's hey, how can we help you? And yes, sometimes we have to investigate things that may seem they're not quite, I don't know how I want to articulate this, but sometimes you have to investigate things where it seems, hey, you stop someone based on, limited information. But that's what an inquiry is, right? That's what an investigation is, or a consensual contact to gain more information. You'll learn all about that in the academy and the legality behind it. But pretty much what I'm getting at is, can you do that? Can you make a consensual contact with someone without violating their rights? Does that person feel detained, or do they feel that they're under arrest? What constitutes all that? We're kind of building this out more in our new course for academy preparation and academy success. But this is where I'm adamant about it, where this is where I see a lot of individuals struggle, because they're saying, man, if I'm ranked number one, I scored the highest on the written exam and I scored the highest on the physical fitness test. Great. Then you went to the board interview and you got removed from the process. Or you went to the board interview and you went from rank number one to rank number 10. Yeah, and they only have 7 slots, right? And the reason for that, you went ranked number 10, is because you couldn't articulate yourself properly, or you couldn't analyze a situation. You couldn't use critical thinking to get through it. It doesn't even have to be perfect. You don't even have to get it right. They just have to see that you can do that, right? Without significant hesitation, so to say. So that's the next one. And then finally, the one that I'm going to end on, there's a bunch more to this, but the one I'm going to end on here is the transition between the evaluation process. Uh, Back in the day, like I said, then there was a lot of emphasis on, hey, is this a strong fit candidate? Then, okay, can I teach? Is it a teachable candidate? Great. Now, a lot is put on the psychological exam. Yes, the background process, being on integrity is still the number one thing. You have to have honesty and integrity going through that process. The minute they determine that you've been untruthful in any aspect, the polygraph, your background investigation, your background interview, any of your references, anything, you're going to get removed and you're going to get blacklisted, right? That's not to say you'll never get hired. I'm just saying you just made our work significantly harder. But what I'm because a lot of times what will happen is individuals will recall something later on, and it's when they bring it up, not that they bring it up. So I'm not going to go into that. Let's get into the aspect of where the hiring process. So now you have your integrity. That's a critical one. That one's always been there. Then versus now, still the same. Integrity is the highest aspect, right? Honesty, integrity. But then you get into the new evaluation criteria, which is departments aren't looking at individuals to say, hey, man, are they going to pass the poly anymore? No, they're saying, are they going to pass the psychological? Is a psychologist going to deem them fit for duty, that they have the mental capacity to handle the stressors of a law enforcement profession? And that's what the psychologist is supposed to be evaluating. But some of them go even deeper, right? Some of them get access to your entire background history. So tell me about that time, you stole something, stole candy from the store as a kid, right? And they're using that, they're using your background against you to determine your psyche, right? Like, hey, did this individual understand the concept there? And how do they answer that? Oh, I was just a kid, I didn't know any better. Okay. Well, what should make me think you know better now? Right. And then you're stuck there, because how do you explain that to yourself or to the psychologist? How do you answer a question where they just said, hey, tell me why you're good enough and tell me why your past mistakes doesn't doesn't rule you out. Whereas in a background investigator, they just say, hey, tell me about your past mistakes, right? Let me know, be honest, is it a disqualifying factor or not? And then they did make that determination and move forward. No, the psychologist says, hey, tell me about that past mistake, what you learned from it, or why I should believe that you won't make that same past mistake. And then is that answer good enough for that psychologist, for their personal opinion, right? Because they're I shouldn't even say personal, their professional opinion. Sometimes they mix personal into it, right? I've seen bias from psychologists, which is unfortunate because they're supposed to be ruling out bias in you. But for that aspect, is it critical, right? Is it critical enough that you don't get removed from the process in the psychological? I'm telling you, as departments go on, they're sweating bullets when a candidate goes to the psychologist. Is that candidate gonna pass? And it's in dual parts, which I'm not going to jump into, because a lot of times they feel psychologists are overstepping and performing background investigations, but at the same point in time, you know the other perspective is, hey, we want to put good officers out on the street, which we do, of course, right? You never want to put a bad officer out on the street, but is the psychologist's bias getting in the way? Should they be the determining factor that puts a candidate through? Now, a chief or a sheriff ultimately has that decision, right? They can, or a senior agent in charge, whoever's in charge of the hiring process, right? If you're going like federal special agent or something along those lines. But that is a critical element of it. And one of the things is some psychologists are being reviewed right now for, their uh, unconscious bias, right? Have they been ruling out certain candidates because they're trying to, create a certain criteria of officer or something that doesn't necessarily properly represent the community? It doesn't matter. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is the then versus now is, there was some weight put on the psychological exam in the past, if it even had a psychological exam, versus now significant amount of weight is put on the psychological exam. And it's really hard because that's usually not all the time, one of the last steps in the hiring process. And you can go through the entire hiring process. And once again, I've seen this, individuals completely, they get their conditional offer, they drop all the other departments, the other 2 or 10 that they have, whatever it is. And then they get to the psychologist and fail the psychologist. Matter of fact, I'll get people on those coaching calls I was telling you about, will say, I think I got this. I'm good to go. I just have to pass the psychological. And then they call me back 2 weeks later saying, I failed the psych. What do I do? And I tell them it's harder now. Now you have to articulate why you failed that psychologist. And if any other departments you're applying to use that same psychologist, they're going to remove you from the process too, until you're re-eligible to go to that psychologist for a reevaluation, which could be a year, could be 2. It just depends. And I don't think anyone wants to wait that long to start their career. But the then versus now, right? Key things is, department you apply to, right? What type of candidate they're looking for. and then how that candidate is being evaluated. Completely different for the past, so let's say prior 2010 to now. I hope this helps. Once again, those gifts are in the description. The Getting Started workshop is going to walk you through every phase of the hiring process, plus the hidden bonuses. In addition, coaching calls with any member of my team or myself. We'd be glad to sit down, help you in any way possible. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.